Hello, and welcome to all of you. Uh, the topic that we have chosen today is mastering self and leading others through uncertainty. Now, in fact, before we started, we were actually generally chatting up with one of the panelists, and we were talking about why 6 months into the work from home and all the lockdown and slow lifting of lockdown is what we are actually discussing this topic about. And we realized that this may be the best time to do something like this. Why? Because when we started this on the 24th of March, we did not anticipate it would become a 6 month and the new normal would actually become the new normal, in the sense that we have to continuously think of how we will continue to manage work and our lives as we go along. And work will not be the same. Our lives, our homes will not be the same. For example, one of the things that all of us will have to now start thinking about is a dedicated home office space. The other thing that we have to start thinking about is when we have to collaborate with our colleagues, how do we do it? How do we meet in person? The third thing, of course, is the organizations have already started shifting to what they call hot seats. So earlier we would have a dedicated seat, we would have a set of people who used to sit around us. But today, all that is going to change, right? Add to it the fact that we are working tirelessly. There are blurring of office times and and personal times. In fact, we are surrounded with people in our family throughout and the work both. The question is, how do we manage productivity? Because we have to continue to do household work, we have to continue to do office work. The problem is, when does office end and when does my personal life start? That has become a huge challenge. In fact, interestingly, there was a very interesting article I was reading, in which Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella also spoke about it. And he talked about the fact that this lockdown, for example, one of the challenges that he faced is the blurring of office and personal lives, and therefore he had to actually create a schedule which was slightly more rigid or more, I won't call it rigid, I would say it was slightly more maybe more regulated schedule, so that he could find time for work as well as for family, and he could actually create those two, create silos. Because when you ask people whether productivity has gone up, people will always say yes, not realizing that when we look at productivity, we think about how much work am I able to do. We are not thinking about how much output am I producing from my work point of view. But when people ask the questions around productivity, they ask the question around, to what extent are you able to increase your productivity from business point of view? So we always think of the total work that we do, but that's not normally the question that people ask. And the other question that all of us are facing is, how can we sustain a life like this? Is there a balance we can create? Is there harmony we can create? And to answer this question, we actually have today with us two great panelists from Times Ascent, who have actually kindly agreed to talk to us. I'm going to introduce the first panelist, Dr. Marcus Rane. Now, Mr. Rane has a very interesting profile. He actually has a Bachelor of Science and Medical degrees from University College Medical School in London. And not only that, he actually has passion for extreme physiology. And that has allowed him to conduct field research across the planet, with expeditions that have taken him to the sides of Everest, skiing in the Arctic and the European Alps. He has served as a medical officer in the Royal Air Force and also at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. After practicing clinical medicine in London in 2010, Dr. Marcus made the transition to Bombay, where he has now worked with the healthcare and life sciences industry as a strategic advisor and investor with a range of MNC and national bellwether firms. He currently serves as a general manager of Thrive Global in India, which is a US-based behavioral change technology and media company. The company was founded by Ariana Huffington in 2016. In fact, augmenting his contributions towards global health commentary, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought Marcus back to the front lines of medicine as a medical volunteer for his city's fight against controlling the virus. He is a published author, he is a keynote speaker, and a public health commentator. In fact, Dr. Marcus has also been on World Economic Forum's Global Shaper. And more recently, he was appointed as a senior fellow to the Atlantic Council, working in a project exploring the relationships between climate crisis and global health. Now, Dr. Marcus is a champion of well-being. He's a big believer that sustainably improving the lives of billions of people around the world can only be brought about by enhancing the positive aspect of health rather than focusing solely on pathogenesis and disease. Dr. Marcus has a very interesting record, actually. He has a Guinness World Record for running backwards. And he is a keen athlete and a long distance marathon runner. And in addition to doing all the work that I talked about, he also thoroughly enjoys being a father to his two young children. Dr. Marcus, if you can just quickly wave to the audience and say hi, then I will actually introduce.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm excited by this session. Thanks, Pracham.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Marcus. In fact, our second panelist, again, a heavyweight in terms of personal productivity, mentorship, coaching, is Prashant Sharma. Prashant Sharma is an ICF certified executive coach with deep industry and entrepreneurial experience. Now, interestingly, he has more than 750 hours of experience coaching senior corporate executives to get visibility, recognition, and growth that they deserve. In fact, he started his training journey 20 years ago when he was invited by the New Delhi YMCA to lead a course on public speaking and effective communication, which was also recognized by Times of India. Prashant Sharma is also the author of the book Soft Skills, Personality Development for Life Success. Now, Prashant runs his own organization called firstpersonality.com. So you can actually go and visit more about the work that they do on that website. Prashant has also launched an in-school soft skills training program for students. Again, the idea is to actually make sure that the students who are climbing up the educational ladder and who will then merge into the corporate world should have all the soft skills and social skills that they need to succeed. Now, Prashant, in addition to having expertise in coaching leaders and inspiring thousands of professionals and helping people realize their true potential, he is also a first prize diploma holder in public speaking from the prestigious Nazareth Speakers Academy in Bombay. In fact, after completing his BCom from the Sydenham College, Bombay, he went to University of Massachusetts to complete his master's in management, and then he returned to India after the post-liberalization to become part of that story. In fact, interesting thing about Prashant is that despite being from a non-business family, he actually started his own successful export company, where he employed more than 200 people in his business. So clearly he understands the pressures that come with business productivity, business results, and any challenges that arise out of that. In his career spanning 2 decades, life as a corporate executive and entrepreneur has been a great teacher, and Prashant is determined to share his teaching with everybody who comes in contact with him. That means that he has seen life up close and personal, and he does not shy away from sharing his own experiences. And today, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we utilize the expertise of these two panelists who between them actually have more than 4 decades of experience amongst themselves to share with us how we can make best of what we are presented with today. In fact, interestingly, Prashant was also nominated by the Government of India to train UPSC qualified IAS, IPS, and IFS service officers in soft skills and business English. Prashant is also on the visiting faculty panel of premier government training institutions, which are run by Ministry of Finance, for example, INGAF, SBI Training Academy, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So Prashant, a quick hi to the audience so that we can then start our session.
Thank you very much, Pancham. Welcome all the attendees, and Dr. Marcus, it's a pleasure and an honor to be sharing the panel with you. We look forward to a very good and sharing our experiences.
Sure, thanks. Good. So, folks, coming back to the agenda that we have for today, we normally would we want to make sure that this webinar is not only about conversations on what people are doing and what others are doing and what can do, but this seminar is actually more about what the two panelists themselves have undergone and what advice they can share with us as to how we can use some of the tricks and tools to make our lives better. And in order for us to be able to do that, I think the first step is to see where we are. So my request to all of us would be let's go to www.menti.com. When we go to Menti, we would want you to use the meeting code 4132699. So I repeat, let's go to menti.com, use the meeting code 4132699. You would see a quick question. We can see some people. Okay, I see more people coming in. Okay, interesting. So one of the themes that continues to actually emerge in most of the conversations also, and which is also coming here, is the balance between own work and home priorities. Means the office work and home priorities has become a bit of a challenge. The second thing, of course, is how do we continue to be productive? Interesting. How do we address team members' anxiety? Okay, that's interesting. So we'll just take the next couple of minutes. We'll wait for some more responses, and then we'll maybe start conversations around this. Okay, so I think while others can continue to vote, I think so. So Dr. Marcus and Prashant, looking at these numbers and the challenges that people have pointed out, any first reactions, Dr. Marcus?
It's unsurprising actually. I would imagine it to have been like this. I mean, the question has been very well framed. So yeah, it's a good set. Do you want me to respond to this, or are we going to get into some Q&A around
Certainly,
it?
certainly. It's just that I just wanted to also take the first views from Prashant, then I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised with number one. I would think since we are so deadline driven and deliverables driven, number one is number one. What I'm a little surprised is that well, I'm not surprised. We've been seeing this narrative, but collaboration I would have thought would have been a bigger challenge. But managing self seems to have come at number two. So we will discuss that. I'm not surprised at the number one choice.
Interesting. Oh, okay. So Dr. Marcus, so given this, so and the fact that you don't find it unsurprising, would you like to elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, I think a common narrative which is being played out across organizations is this conversation around balance versus harmony, right? I think it even cropped up already in our conversations. When we look at this word productivity, the work that I've been seeing in organizations which I've been engaged with, there has roughly been around 120 minutes of extra work that people are doing every day, but the productivity gain in terms of that additional effective 25-30% is not really translating into a productivity gain. In fact, it's almost like the hamster in the flywheel. People are just keeping busy for the sake of keeping busy, and there's no productive output coming around that. The second, of course, is the timeline and the deliverables. As we know, in India, economically, we have been one of the hardest hit countries across the world, both in terms of the caseloads of the virus, but more importantly, the lives versus livelihood debate, and we're opening up even though other countries are closing down. And because of that, there are business pressures and people are trying to maintain afloat, etc. And so there are deliverable timelines. So when I ever get asked or ponder around this question of balance, I'm reminded of the story of Buddha, where he spoke about the ornate instrument with the string and the player whose role it is to pluck the string. And the role of the instrument is to produce a melodic sound for the universe, which is very similar to our body. We are the ornate instrument. The string is our output, our productivity. Now, we can exist in one of three states. Either we've got too much tension in the system, too much work pressure on one hand, home pressure, social pressure, professional pressure, etc. And if you pluck the string, it snaps. The other extreme is there's too little ambition, there's too little pressure, there's too little stress in the system. It produces a sound, no less. It produces a note, but it's flat, it wobbles, it's not melodic to the ear. And the middle path is the right amount of tension, the right amount of string. And therefore, this word harmony is something we need to embrace. Embrace because we cannot distribute our credits of time equitably across all the spheres of our life and somehow imagine that we are appeased in the process. Life doesn't work that way. Instead, I like to think of life as a 3-to-1 rule. What are the three things that you do every day that gives you energy, that you draw your inspiration from? So for me, it's staying active, it's playing with my children, and it's service. Either it's on the front lines or it's through the writing that I do in public health commentary. So this is where I draw my energy reserves from. And then the 3-to-1 rule. So what is the one thing that I need to do every day, which is activities like this, coming to the forefront, talking about work, etc. So we should each identify three aspects of our lives that we can draw energy and harmonize it to where we then want to invest our energy towards. And the best way of doing that, which touches upon number 2 before I hand over to Prashant, is self-care and self-love. It is not selfish. That's actually my mantra that I've tried to live my life out of the last 4 or 5 years. And we cannot be in a position to help other people if we're not looking after ourselves first. We cannot lead others if we do not lead ourselves first in the process. So that's sort of my early reactions to this poll and my thoughts.
Oh, thanks a lot, Dr. Marcus. Actually, you talked about something very interesting. You talked about the fact that we are talking about harmony. We're not talking about balance. So that's a marked deviation from what people typically talk about, balance. The second thing that I found very intriguing, and this is a conversation I was also having with Prashant some time back, is the focus on productivity, and therefore, for example, how the stress can derail us at times, and then at times we end up as an instrument which is very tightly wound. So Prashant, in fact, you have worked with many senior leaders over the last 7 months also. So the question to you, because the first question is, do they also have similar challenges that they talk to you about, number one? And number two, what is your advice to them in terms of how can they manage it better?
Thanks, Pancham. So my take on on what we have discussed on the topic, which is maintaining productivity and timeline deliverables, and the challenges that leaders and their teams are facing. So what I have seen is that in the old normal, when we were in office working together face to face with physical contact and everything, a lot of the factors were in our control. A lot of things got done because of physical presence, a lot because of because obviously the economy and everything was, a lot of things were in our control. Budgets were in our control. The client was, the orders were coming in. Now what has happened is that even if one wants to work at optimum level, you want to put in your best, there are many factors beyond your control. Some of them are micro factors, some of them are macro factors, right? So you have right from lockdown problems to supply chain issues to client budgets getting slashed to the worldwide economy and the negativity and the negative narrative, which are beyond our control. It is preventing me from doing my best, and that is leading to a sort of a frustration which feeds into number two, which we can see on our screen, and that is that is causing the stress and a lot of the frustration that we see. So leaders are finding themselves sort of chained and not able to produce or think at the best, simply because virtually many of the things are not possible which were face to face. And those are the particular challenges which I tell leaders that in this new normal, we'll have to treat virtual as offline and work around those challenges. So mindset, is negative mindset is contagious like COVID, right? So how to move from a negative mindset to a positive mindset, continue to think creatively, encourage your teams to give their best, find opportunity in adversity. These are the conversations I'm having with leaders right now.
Interesting. Actually, while you were talking about these things, Dr. Marcus and Prashant, there was a question that has come out. What are the traits of a good leader? So what we will do is we'll certainly answer this question, but maybe it's too early for us to take that up now. But as we go along, I'm sure we will be able to give you at least some insights into what is it that some great leaders are doing to manage and balance the new normal for all of us. Yeah. So interesting, actually. So in fact, Prashant, what you talked about, I found very interesting, is the reframing. So think of online as offline and work around it. So that is an interesting thing. And Dr. Marcus talked about harmony. So these two are interesting conversations. In fact, the other thing that we actually were also discussing, and this is something that has been cropping up in many conversations that at least I have also been having with people, is that one of the advantages or disadvantages, depending on how you look at it, is also about the fact that because you're not going to work, you are working, but you're not going to work. So there is no compulsion for you to start from home at 8:15 so that you can reach office by 9:15, settle by 9:30. So that probably would allow people some flexibility in terms of how they can plan their day. But in fact, what we have seen is that people still find it difficult, because people still find it difficult to maintain productivity. People still find it difficult to manage own work and home priorities. And one of the conversations that I was having with people, so they talked about a very interesting work that Dan Pink had done on the subject um, uh, around our rhythms and how we can maximize our rhythms. So Dr. Marcus, Prashant, we will actually segue to that segment. But before we do that, it will be a good time for us to go back to the audience and see how what to what extent they're aware of their rhythms, number one, and to what extent are they actually using it to their fullest. So audience, this is again time for you to get back to Menti. So what we need to do is think about those days when you don't have any pressure. You don't have to wake up early because you have to drop somebody to school, or you have to go somewhere, or there is an early morning call that you have today because you are actually working on, let's say, Australia New Zealand shift or something. And for those days, think about what time do you usually go to sleep when there is no pressure on you, and when do you usually wake up. So there is a bit of calculation required on your end. So mark the time that you usually go to sleep, mark the time that you usually wake up, and then find a midpoint of these two times. For example, if you went to sleep at 10 o'clock in the night and you woke up at 6, So then you have to look at 10 o'clock and 6. What is the midpoint between these two times? So once you have done that, we are hoping that you have now completed that calculation. For example, if you sleep at 10, if you wake up at 6, then your midpoint is around 2 o'clock or so. So the question therefore is, uh, uh, similarly, for whatever time you wake up and all, you would all have different times, and that is an important element for us. So let me just move to the next ask that we have of you. So midpoint of sleep that you identify, what is the midpoint for you?
There are 3 boxes that come up. Are we meant to insert 100 there plus 10?
Yes. So yeah, I can. So basically, you have to give 100 to the one that applies to you.
Okay.
Yeah, and 0 to everything else. So I didn't realize that this would be actually, the scoring would be a challenge. Yeah, because the moment I clarified, I see people responding. That's interesting. So I'm repeating. So if there are 3 boxes and you have to split 100 points, you have to give 100 points to whichever block your midpoint of sleep comes in, and 0 to others. That's about it. Yeah, I can see some of these now. Okay, responses. Okay, interesting. Okay, so majority of us are actually morning people in that sense. Yeah. So Prashant, while of course people, I'm sure the people will keep talking about it, but coming back to now, because we are cognizant of the time that we have at hand. So when you look at data like this, so there are 63% of the people who actually are morning people. Daniel Pink calls them larks. 28% of people are slightly late morning people, not really early morning people, and 8% of people, they really are people who normally peak slightly later in the day in terms of productivity. So in your experience, when you worked with leaders, how have you been using information like this, the my own body clock, my own productivity rhythm?
It's the irony in the subject of sleep. The irony is that one would have thought that work from home, one would be sleeping more. However, my experience with leaders is that we are sleeping less. The quality of sleep has declined for many reasons. Lack of physical activity could be one, or just stress and tension could be another. How this data is used, and referencing Dan Pink's work as well, is that every person has a body clock, and that body clock tells you basically at what time of the day, typically on a 24-hour day, you are at your peak. What part of the day that you are not at your peak, you are sort of in a trough, and what part you are in a recovery phase. So peak, trough, and recovery. How leaders use it is, we when we do assessments, there are behavioral assessments, there are personality assessments. astute leaders are able to look at their teams and are able to actually now categorize their team members into what works best for the team, not necessarily what works best for them. So, leaders now have to be psychologists, they have to be counselors, they have to be detectives, they have to be mentors, parents, managers, all roll into one. So if I'm cognizant of my team, my important team members' peak times, I schedule meetings accordingly. I set deadlines and deliverables accordingly. This is not being done ideally, but in an ideal world, this is how this research would be used. But it's happening right now.
That's actually interesting. So what you're recommending, Prashant, is that as a leader, one of the first things I must do is I should know what my rhythm is. Number one.
Yes.
Number two, what is my team's rhythm? All right. And then I see if, for example, there is someone who is an owl, we know that the person actually works late in the evening, then it doesn't make sense pressurizing the person to submit an assignment early in the morning, because clearly the person will not be at his or her best, number one. And number two, you're unnecessarily putting pressure on the individual.
To add to that, Pancham, I'm telling a lot of leaders and, in the coaching conversations is to focus on the outcome, right? A little bit flexibility is required in our dealings, especially now in lockdown, where, there are so many external stresses and tensions at play. Letting people be sometimes and giving them that flexibility, output and productivity increases. And we are seeing it. I'm actually seeing it in my coaching conversations and in a lot of the case studies that we have been doing in companies.
Interesting. So Dr. Marcus, actually, with your background in medicine and also your deep interest in physiology, so it'll be good to know, for example, how you have seen some of this manifest in corporate world, in terms of how people who are very successful are able to intuitively, or maybe in a matter of formal learning, are able to manage their body clocks better than others.
Yeah, I haven't read Dan Pink's work in quite a while, but if my memory serves me correctly, and I'm just looking at the data, from what I remember, the percentage of people in the third bird category, as far as his studies, was much higher than what we're seeing.
Much higher.
And
Yes.
in fact, the larks was significantly less, even smaller than the owls. So it's a little interesting. I know we've got a very small sample size, but yeah, that's an interesting point to compare with what. So in his work, it was 65%, I think, third bird, 20% owl, and 15% lark, something like that. You're right. I mean, physiologically, this has actually been a subject which I'm very interested in, particularly after becoming a parent for the first time. I say that tongue in cheek. Sleep has become a luxury for us in this house. I've got two toddlers. My son is 4. My daughter will be 2 in a couple of days' time. So I've come to the realization that parenthood is life's way of teaching us how to cope in a continuous sleep-deprived state. And I'm hoping at some point I will get back to my 8-9 hours at some point. But yeah, now it's still 6 or 7 disturbed sleep. It's a very interesting space. If you look back anthropologically, the pattern of sleep that we have in our lives right now only started to appear after the advent of the light bulb and the introduction of a work shift pattern of basically 2 in the second industrial revolution. There was a 12-hour day shift and a 12-hour night shift, with factories operational 24/7 using electricity and light. Prior to that, in many civilizations, in many cultures around the world, we as a species evolved in a biphasic pattern. So we would go to bed as the night would come up. We would then typically wake up in the early hours of the morning, spend that time in spiritual activities or sort of self-reflective activities like meditation, etc. Then go to sleep again at night and then wake up for the agricultural requirements or later in the day, depending upon what your role was in your local culture, in your local society. So we had this very interesting biphasic approach, which then got unified when electricity and the second industrial revolution came in. Now, from a physiological perspective, we have 4 sleep pressures. There are 4 biochemical reactions that happen which increase through the day, which lead to us then falling asleep. Number one is the opposition of two hormones, cortisol, which keeps us awake, and melatonin, which in us, in human beings, makes us go to sleep. Interestingly, in other mammals, the same hormone makes them get up, like bats who are nocturnal. Melatonin is actually the hormone which wakes them up. But with us, it goes in opposition. So these are two. Then we have the effect of light. So Prashant spoke about the circadian rhythm, which is named after the sun appearance in different hemispheres. And we see people in the northern climes, northern hemispheres, particularly towards the pole, when they have a long sleep, a long daylight cycle in their summer months, their sleep gets impacted because there's so much light around them as well. And so all of these aspects, and adenosine, which is the buildup of a toxic chemical in our body. So these four drivers lead to a sleep pressure, which ultimately it reaches a particular threshold. And unlike the other physiological drivers like hunger or thirst, which can be overridden through conscious control, sleep cannot. When you reach a particular threshold, and narcolepsy is a typical manifestation of this, you will physically drop down and crash. There is no way of overcoming that. And this is very dangerous in certain occupations like surgeons and pilots and people who operate heavy machinery, which is why this particular area has become such an important aspect of occupational health over the last few years. So these four things drive us to sleep. Now, we have 4 phases of sleep. I won't go into it too much. There's a fantastic TEDx series which is going on the TED channel right now. But basically, stage 3 and 4, which occur in our deep phase, in the delta wave aspect of sleep, is where our bodies get the most nourishment from. Our brains use it as a time to, it's effectively like a washing machine. We circulate the cerebrospinal fluid and we get rid of all the neurotoxins which build up during the day. It prevents the progression of Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disorders as well. It reduces the incidence of chronic diseases like hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, etc. So there are lots of physical and mental benefits of ensuring that we get enough sleep. Now, why is this important, and why is this important now? Prashant spoke very eloquently and appropriately of the fact that we're not getting enough, or our quality of sleep has been disturbed. And if you look back over the last few years, it used to be a badge of honor that we used to wear. Oh, I only need to sleep 4 hours a night, or I can perform really well by sleeping 5 hours a night. Well, actually, no, that's wrong. Physiologically, we know that's not the case. You are building up a sleep debt that was leading to chronic diseases or impacts in your work and decision making. In fact, Jeff Bezos, who recently wrote an article about why he ensures he gets 8 hours of sleep every day, because it improves his decision making and it adds value to his stakeholders. And as a shareholder in the company, as a shareholder in the company, it's very important for all of us that he makes good decision making, good decisions as well. So this is an important tool which is now transpired into the business community and the sporting community, both aspects, because we now know how tightly coupled sleep is with performance, physical performance and mental performance. I will end by talking a little bit about why it's important now. I do a lot of workshops with leaders and corporations around why sleep is fundamental to our resilience, our immunity, and our mood. And I'll just showcase that through some data points that I have at hand. Number one, immune system and sleep, again, very tightly coupled. The T cell response, we're all becoming WhatsApp immunologists because of all the messages that we get sent every day. So we all know that the T cell recognizes the antigen and it helps the B cell produce an antibody. The efficacy of a T cell is directly linked to how much rest your body gets. So if you're not sleeping well, and we know this because when we used to have long days, we would naturally develop a cough and a cold and a fever, etc. So if you're not sleeping properly, your immune system is depressed. Number two, the amount of fuel that you consume and the type of fuel you consume is directly controlled by how much sleep you get. Again, if you think about a day where you had poor sleep, the next morning you wake up craving sugary foods and a lot of foods because the fight and flight response, which is then kicked in, you then crave calories. So it's very important to control the amount of food which you're eating, which is important to our productivity and our performance and our health right now. And the last thing is around mental and emotional health. By sleeping less than 7 hours every night for 3 days in a row, you are 19% increase in stress levels, you have a 14% increase in behaving inappropriately at work, and you have an almost 20% increase in losing your temper with your children and with your spouse, people who are spending the most number of hours right now. So the impact on sleep on our lives in the corporate world, in our personal lives, and in our general performance and productivity has probably never been more important than it is today.
In fact, what you talked about is very interesting. So if I were to look at what Prashant you spoke about and what Dr. Marcus you spoke about, I am simply sensing that if I am a leader, especially because I'm a middle-level manager, and I have to manage upwards, I have to manage downwards, and I have to manage my peers and clients. So one of the first things I have to do is make sure that I am in a frame of mind where I am not doing anything to increase my stress levels. And one of the important things there is actually to get adequate rest, eat properly, and maintain a healthy routine, number one. The second thing, of course, is the fact that I have to understand the rhythm of other people. At what time are they most productive? What is the best time to get to people? And third, of course, is to then manage my day so that I can get the best out of each individual depending on when they are the most productive. Number one. The second role, and Prashant, here I would actually want you to also talk about in a while, is that as a manager, my responsibility is not only about getting the task done, but also maybe educate my team about the physiological impact of some of the bad habits or good habits that we have. And so when you talk to, for example, people, in fact, when you talk to senior leaders, one of the reason they engage with people like you is because at that moment in life they have been reasonably successful, but at the same time maybe they have reached a plateau which is stopping them from maybe growing further, and that's why they start looking at you as mentors. That's why maybe they start seeking your help in getting some more mentors and so on and so forth. Now unfortunately with mid-level manager it is expected that they will mentor their teams, but for those people, you think there is merit in having mentors assigned to them as well?
Absolutely, Pancham. I think coaching and mentoring is now more important than ever, especially when we talk about, we talk about rising up the corporate hierarchy. It starts getting a little bit lonelier as you go to the top. Because of organizational dynamics, because of work pressure, there are lesser people that one can reach out to, right? So many times family and friends can't provide you that kind of, they don't have the exposure or the knowledge to provide you that kind of an input. At that point, mentorship and coaching definitely helps. Where I think, where coaching and mentors can really make a difference. And I would really urge everybody listening today to really reach out on a formal or informal level to people who have experienced, a situation like COVID earlier, for example, right? Many of your friends, many of the people that you know in your teams may not have experienced earlier downturns. But if you were to talk to people who are leading you and have those kind of conversations, somebody who had been there in 2008, for example, when the earlier downturn happened, the subprime crisis, or there was, even in 2000, the dot-com thing happened. You will realize this is not the first time it happened. This is sort of an every 10-year cycle. And in every 10 years, there are people who have been able to successfully come out of it. I'll tell you, in my business, that export business that you were talking about, we had to shut it down in the last subprime crisis because of many mistakes that we made. But I learned from those mistakes, and here I am today. Whatever I do in the coaching actually comes out of those mistakes. Now, to answer, one of the answers to your question is, what does a coach or a mentor or or somebody who advisor bring to the table? I call it mindset gardening, right? So imagine your mind is a garden, right? How would you approach an empty patch of land? You would first de-weed. You would take out the old weeds, whatever impurities are there, right? To add something to your life, you need to subtract something. So subtract negative influences from your mind. Subtract negative thoughts. Surround yourself with positivity. So the first is de-weeding. The second is reseeding. You plant new seeds. And this is where, if you ever had, if you have a thoughts of a side hustle, you wanted to start a side business, you had a business plan, Start talking to people, your friends, your family. You need not make it your main business, but have those kind of creative conversations. And the third is feed forward, right? Put yourself in the company of people who know more than you. This is what I tell leaders. Remove the impurities, plant new seeds, and surround yourself with people who know more than you. The hubris, the ego, that status that we have sometimes comes crashing down once you learn from other people. So COVID or any other black swan event is a fantastic opportunity to find opportunity in this adversity. So very quickly, I'll give you an example of somebody who came to me for advice, and they wanted to start a food delivery. Very simple idea: South Indian food delivery in a gated colony. These two middle managers in an IT company. So we bounced the business plan and everything, but they were very unsure whether they should do it. So I encouraged them, and they actually went and did it. What happened was they actually came up with a business plan. So they knew they could do it, and the demand was there as well. So they started doing really well. And what happened was that one day what happened was because the chef did not show up, the food delivery was late. And these people were shattered. They called me in panic and said, "We are going to lose all our clients. It's the end of the world. Prashant, I told you I shouldn't have done it. My clients are going to be furious with me." And you know what happened? Nothing happened. Clients understood that delays happen, but what did they want? They wanted clean food, they wanted cheap food, they wanted hygienic food. They were getting that. They were willing to help out two young boys and one woman, three people, and it's okay if there are delays. So what I tell leaders also is, sometimes COVID and all these, these kind of situations are an ideal way to test out things that you want, and they make you feel better, perform better. You'll be able to make your teams more productive.
Well, actually, you hit upon a very interesting topic, which incidentally is the next section that anyways we were thinking to move to. So Taleb talks about anti-fragility. And incidentally, in fact, I always tell people that when you, in one of the interviews, he was very furious because somebody said that COVID actually is a black swan event. He said, no, it's a white swan event. And people said, why? And he said, you guys are not listening. You guys are not listening to what is happening around you. And then he started giving examples. He says, think about it. What is COVID? So COVID actually is one of those viruses that has actually come to the human side from the animal kingdom. But is this the first one? The answer is no. So he says, for example, SARS was the first one. Then you had bird flu, swine flu, you had MERS, you had Ebola. These were all warning signs. And then he also talks about the fact that Bill Gates, in one of the TED Talks, where he got live mosquitoes just to tell people, for example, he was talking about malaria and the fact that he predicted there that there could be a global pandemic. And therefore, why should we invest in healthcare is the question that he was trying to address. So people had predicted it. There were telltale signs of some of these things coming to us, but we never reacted. So he says that we had the signs, but what we did not have the foresight to look at how, in a worst case scenario, this would look like, and therefore our systems became fragile. And that's what he talked about is happening in the world today. That companies that were actually most of the companies and systems that are fragile, they are reeling under the stress. But systems that are anti-fragile, those are the ones they will actually emerge stronger. And in fact, in our careers, we are faced with a lot of moments where our anti-fragility is tested. And that's where we also find there are some people who actually, you know, buck under pressure. There are some people who thrive in pressure and they emerge victorious. And for all the managers, especially when we talk about the fact that the world is becoming more and more uncertain. The world is the business models are changing by the day. Business, new and new things are coming and disrupting the way we have known business as it is. What is it that we can do to become what we call anti-fragile? Anti-fragile means those systems which thrive in chaos, or who actually become stronger whenever a unforeseen event or a negative event happens to them. So audience, now with that thought, we will come back to you and we will now transition to the third section. Again, we would request you to get back to Mentimeter, and the next question actually is coming to you. So this question, we have to deal with this together. So I'll just start sharing with you how we have to answer this. This is a small short quiz which talks about how anti-fragile are we, right? On your mobiles or on your web platform, what you would see is actually these statements and a 5-point scale. So for the first question, the question that we want you to ask is, in the last 1 year, how many hours in a week have you spent developing a skill for future? If you have spent more than 5 hours a week, then you give yourself 5. If you have spent 1 hour to 2 hours, you give yourself 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. So once you answer the first one, if you have spent more than 5 hours a week developing a new skill, tangible skill for future, give yourself 5. Else, give yourself, depending on how many hours you have spent. Moving to the second one, if you sampled 100 people with a similar skill set and level of expertise, that means people who have the same skill as you, and if we actually randomly choose 100 people with the same skills that you have and same level of expertise, where would you be ranked? If we were to create a force ranking, where would you be? Would you be at the top quartile, or would you be at the bottom quartile? Would you be at the median? If you think that you would be at the top 10% or top quartile, give yourself 5, and so on and so forth. If you think you are median, give yourself 3. If you are between median and top quartile, give yourself 4, and so on and so forth. And if you find that you, for example, are not very confident that you would be in around the 50th percentile, then you can give yourself 2 or 1, depending on how you think about it. Similarly, the next question, if you were to find a job, how many people would wholeheartedly help you and give you glowing recommendation? And here, see, these are skills that we are talking about. What is the impact you have had on people? The next is, how do you rank your ability to persuade others? That means you have pitched an idea, and how have you been able to persuade others to agree to your idea? To what extent you believe you can do it, especially when there are tough conversations, tough negotiations. For example, if you had a new idea, would you be able to convince 1,000 people to buy into that idea? That's the kind of question we are talking about. The next question is, when your fight or flight reflex gets activated, that means when you are faced with a situation where you don't have time to think much, but you have to decide to take a decision very quickly. What has been the quality of your decision? When we say how confident are you in decision making, it's not about whether I can decide. It is also about, have I been able to take the right decisions, especially when I am faced with uncertain situations and where I don't have enough time, for example, to react. The next question is around, how many hours per day are you able to do deep work? Deep work is thinking, insight, analytical work without any interruptions. Are you able to chalk out at least 2 blocks of 2 hours each? That means 4 to 5 hours a day. If the answer is yes, give yourself 5. If you have been able to spend less time, give yourself 10, lesser marks. Moving to the last one. Now, last one is slightly tricky. How would you rate your physical fitness? Now, physical fitness, actually, when we talk about physical fitness, we are talking about a simple yardstick. If you were to look at some basic aerobic fitness levels, we are talking about running around 1.5 miles, which is 2.5 kilometers, 2.4 to be precise. But for the sake of rounding off, we are saying, are you able to run 2.5 kilometers in less than 17 minutes? That's what we are talking about. Similarly, are you able to do proper form 15 push-ups in a row? Similarly, when we talk about flexibility, are you able to, for example, sitting, able to touch, for example, your toes without bending your knees? Similarly, for core strength, are you able to perform a plank for at least 1 minute, proper form plank? Or if not plank, can you actually do at least 30 sit-ups proper form 30 sit-ups. So a combination of all this is what we are talking about, aerobic plus strength fitness. If you think you are able to do that, then you give yourself 5. If not, then you can actually start reducing your scores. And again, I must reiterate this, although it's a given, but this is not an answer for us. This is an answer for yourself. Because unless I'm able to see in the mirror without any distortion, I will not be able to do things to change it. So Dr. Marcus, you've seen the results. So we are talking about how we can actually become how we can emerge stronger. And the themes that we had in mind was exactly the themes that you've been talking about. How do I create harmony? How do I develop a positive routine? How do I make sure that I'm not stressed? At the same time, how do I make sure that I'm ready for the grueling days ahead? So that's what we had talked about. We also know that going forward, because of the automation and increased digitization, we have many jobs which will completely change in the way we expect them to operate, and therefore upskilling and reskilling becomes an important component. I cannot manage myself, my family, and my teams if I'm not physically and mentally fit to do that. I cannot manage knowledge workers or smart creatives if I myself do not have subject matter expertise. And if I am not able to move people along with my ideas, then clearly I will struggle to manage. So that's the theme that we had taken. Looking at this, Dr. Marcus, uh, what do you have to say when you look at the results? These are the average scores of people. This is not an individual score. This is overall aggregate scores.
I'm a big fan of Taleb's work around anti-fragility, and I'm so glad that you introduced it on this conversation, because in so many forums and meetings, we talk about this word resilience, which most people are familiar with, but they're not quite as appreciative of this very interesting theory which was put forward by Taleb, which is about the benefit of growth through uncertainty. And I certainly think that this is the best time for people to try and build that muscle of anti-fragility across the different facets. I love the little framework here. It asks around different aspects of one life, and most importantly, the fact that it also includes things like physical fitness and deep work, etc. It reminds people that we are multi-dimensional organic beings. We don't just have one life, which is the professional life. All of that comes through, the energy comes through all the various aspects of harmonization. I know we're tight on time, so I will end by just sharing something that I've learned myself during COVID at this point in time. At the beginning, you mentioned the fact that I had gone back into the community and I was volunteering as a frontline medic, something that I was getting a lot of harmony from. The actual full story of that is a few months after that, I went on to develop the virus myself, and I had it pretty bad. And I'm still undergoing some rehab to get back on my feet, literally, to get back out there. And what I came to the realization when I was now reflecting back on that period of time, effectively in a state of depression, because I was physically unable to get out of bed because of the effect on my legs, that I had to remember the story of self-care and self-love. And three things came to my mind when I started to initiate a process of coming out. Number one is that suffering is part of the human expression, right? It manifests itself in different ways for each of us, but all of us at some stage go through suffering. If we don't have suffering, we can't appreciate joy. So that was the first realization, that bad things happen. Number two is that whilst that's the commonality, how we respond to it is entirely in our control. Our response, not the reaction, our response is in our control, and we can choose to find the silver lining. We can choose to be anti-fragile by adopting, as Prashant was saying, a positive mindset, a mindset where you're focused around growing the garden rather than just sort of contracting. And the last aspect is that we are each in control whether we appreciate it or not. The physical reality manifests through the thoughts that we have in our mind. And when get faced with a situation, it's up to us whether we choose to say yes or to say no. So if you have something in your life which is taking energy away from you, which is causing you pain, there is no harm in saying no for some period of time, because ultimately, if you don't look after yourself, you will not be in a position to help others. I know if I don't look after myself right now, I cannot go back out into the community and serve the other people who are suffering from the disease themselves. So that's just a little realization that I've come to understand through the last few weeks and months.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Marcus. Prashant, your views, especially the first question. I would be very keen to look at your view because that's the lowest scored question actually overall.
Correct. Pancham, so I'm going to take up from what Dr. Marcus said about being in control. We are in control. But where I see many people struggle is that they want to know how to move forward, right? So yes, my life is in my hands. I'm the driver of my own life. I hear these things. Here's what I tell a lot of people. Like, for example, let's take one small case study based on question number one. Many people come to me and say, I want to upskill myself. I want to do a certification. Now I said, what will the certification do for you? Said, we need to skill ourselves. Come on, we need to have skills, to meet the demands of beyond COVID. So I'm thinking about the future, which is a fantastic thought. I always tell people that you should be developing a skill that you can take with you wherever you go. Yeah. Correct. The skill should be based not just on the demand and supply, but the skill should be based on what you love to do, what you like to do, what you're known for. And it could be a skill not related to your certification. It could be a skill like, for example, Dr. Marcus said, community service. So if you are good at community service, you can talk about it passionately. If you become known for it, opportunities might open up for you in a sphere that you never imagined. Right? You could be, marketing is a skill, sales is a skill, whatever it is. So one is take a skill which which you can take with you, and whatever you do after that should be a subset of that. Yeah, it should not be, decision should not be based out of panic. Champions are strategic in how they approach their life. For example, like what Dr. Marcus said, for example, eliminate negativity from your life. You need to be strategic about it. If you say, I'm going to think positive today, but if you put on the news and your mind is filled with negativity, it undoes whatever your intentions were. So you need to be intentional about moving forward. Saying no is also an intention. You need to, like, you say no with an intention, right? And whether you're a leader or you're a team member, or even if you're not working, it doesn't matter. What matters is you need to be strategic about what is going to happen to us from today onwards. A lot of those questions that I see on your screen, physical fitness is in our hands. You can be interested in something, like I can be interested in physical fitness. So I want to, I'm interested in making, getting a good physique and running a marathon and doing all the great things that Dr. Marcus has said. But am I committed to it? When action actually follows words, that's when interest becomes commitment. So the champion mindset and the mindset of a person who is going to come out of COVID and survive whatever is happening around us is a person who is going to be committed to whatever they set out to do, not just talk about it, not just attending webinars and reading books and listening to people is all good, but in the end, the commitment has to come from within.
Absolutely. Prashant, you actually talked about, Dr. Marcus, you also talked about very important pieces. See, all of us know that we must upskill. All of us know that we must exercise. All of us know that we must lead people. We must influence positively. But the question that we have to always answer is, am I doing it? Number one. And number two, if I'm not, am I ready to make that change? If the answer is yes, then let's go ahead and do it. Because there is nothing which is better than actually acting on your interest, acting on the things that you would want to do, than to do anything else. In fact, what we realize is, there was a lot of research around what most successful people do, and they talk about the fact that they don't have many interests. They only have one or two deep interests that they actually that they follow passionately, and some of these interests are actually completely outside of their core work. So that allows them to also completely rewind and unwind as and when they need it. Number one. Number two, it always creates a plan B in case plan A does not work out, because they have such a strong interest and they're passionate about it, they're able to do something with the next level plan. So folks, anti-fragility is about making sure that we start the action now, and that action has to be from a discipline point of view, from understanding what makes me productive, from making sure that we continuously improve each passing day, whether it is by reskilling ourselves, upskilling ourselves, or whether it is by actually physically becoming better and fitter, more immune, and then pass on that message by becoming a role model to our teams, so that tomorrow when the people that I manage, when they look up to me, they are able to recommend me as a person who is an ideal person that they would like to recommend or look forward to or work with. So on that thought, we wanted to close this today's webinar about managing self and leading others during the time of uncertainty. The principles are not only applicable for uncertainty, but for all kinds of situations. And on that note, I would like to thank Dr. Marcus and Prashant for the valuable insights that you have shared from your own experiences, from your experiences with multiple leaders, including some of the topics that we normally ignore, which is about how human body uh, can actually, if not taken care of properly, we are inducing so much stress in our lives that it actually starts reflecting in our behavior as well. And therefore, before I start helping others, we have to start helping ourselves. So the start with me, then move to others, but make sure there is bias for action, and make sure that we are talking about becoming a better person each passing day, and I think we'll be sorted. On that note, from the Times Ascent team, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pancham. Thank you, Dr. Marcus. And thank you all the attendees of today's webinar. Pleasure having you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.